January 31, 1945. At Clark Air Base in the Philippines, American engineers gathered around the wreckage of a captured Japanese Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber. What they discovered inside its thin metal fuselage stunned them. The aircraft's massive fuel tanks, stretching across its wings and fuselage, were completely unprotected. There were no self-sealing compounds, no armor plating, and no fire suppression systems. Thousands of liters of high-octane aviation fuel sat behind nothing more than sheets of lightweight aluminum. It wasn't a mistake or a manufacturing oversight. It was intentional, a deliberate design philosophy that reflected the Japanese Imperial Navy's obsession with range and offensive reach over crew protection or survivability. In the late 1930s, Japanese engineers faced a daunting challenge: create a bomber capable of striking faraway American and British bases scattered across the Pacific. The result was the G4M, fast, elegant, and capable of flying nearly 3,700 miles, a range unmatched by any Allied bomber of the time. To achieve that, the designers stripped away every ounce of unnecessary weight, even armor. The crew sat inside what was essentially a flying fuel tank. But that compromise gave Japan a weapon that, at the outbreak of the Pacific War, seemed unstoppable. The Betty's long range made it a terror in the skies during the early months of the war. On December 10, 1941, waves of G4M struck the British battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse off the coast of Malaya. In just 90 minutes, both ships were at the bottom of the sea, marking the first time in history that capital ships, actively maneuvering and defending themselves, were sunk entirely by air power. Days earlier, Betty bombers had devastated Clark Field in the Philippines, annihilating America's air strength there before it could even take off. The aircraft became a symbol of Japanese reach and precision, a deadly spearhead of the empire's expansion across the Pacific. But the cost of that performance soon became horrifyingly clear. When the tide of war turned, the same bomber that once struck fear into enemies became a death trap for its own crews. On August 8, 1942, during the battle for Guadalcanal, 23 Betty bombers attempted to strike American forces. 18 were shot down. Over 120 trained airmen perished in a single day. The thin-skinned fuselage, designed for speed and range, ignited instantly when hit by enemy fire. Pilots and gunners were burned alive before they could bail out. American pilots began calling the G4M the Flying Lighter, and Japanese crews grimly agreed, nicknaming it the Type 1 Lighter or One-Shot Zippo. Despite these horrific losses, the Betty remained Japan's main long-range bomber until the end of the war. Its missions were legendary and tragic. It carried the operation that assassinated Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack in April 1943. Yamamoto's own Betty was ambushed and shot down by American P-38s over Bougainville. All aboard perished in flames. Later in the war, the bomber was adapted to carry the Yokosuka MYX-7 Oka, a manned kamikaze rocket, in desperate suicide missions that only increased its grim legacy. By 1945, the G4M Betty was an anachronism, fragile, obsolete, and outmatched. Yet Japan continued to send it into the skies, often with young, inexperienced crews who knew their chances of survival were slim. The same design that once made the Betty a marvel of aviation engineering now made it a symbol of futility, a weapon that embodied the tragic extremes of Japanese military philosophy: glory over survival, range over armor, sacrifice over safety. When American engineers examined that captured wreckage at Clark Field, they finally understood what the Japanese valued most: not protection, but reach. The Betty could fly farther, faster, and strike deeper than any other bomber at the start of the Pacific War. But every one of those extra miles was paid for in blood. The G4M was both brilliant and suicidal, a masterpiece of engineering that became a mass grave for those who flew it. From the burning wreckage of HMS Prince of Wales and Repulse, to the flaming skies over Guadalcanal, to the final desperate kamikaze raids of 1945, the story of the Betty bomber is one of triumph and tragedy. It was a plane that revolutionized Japan's air warfare and doomed thousands of its own men in the process, a machine that could reach any target but almost never return.